What will be the effect of minimum wage nonsense in states like Nebraska and California? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy from the Future of Freedom Foundation. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to be here with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, nice to have you all back. If you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org for around 32 years of principled, uncompromising perspectives on liberty. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. We've got a great FFF Daily. We've got some great books at our store. So come and give us a gander. So, Richard, this is a new semester for you. How's it going so far?
Going very well, teaching some sections of macroeconomics, using them as a means of not only explaining to the students what's going on in the sort of economy-wide sense, but to be able to refute and challenge and question a lot of the nonsense going on in Washington right now.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is minimum wage nonsense. I mean, you and I have talked about minimum wage nonsense many times over the years, but it just boggles the mind, Richard, how statists continue to believe that this is an effective government program, that you could just legislate away the laws of supply and demand. It's absolutely incredible. So we've got three examples of where this nonsense is going on, but I'm sure there's a lot more. In the state of Minnesota, I blogged Monday on this, and I'll go into this here in the introduction, but there's also the state of Nebraska, which has enacted a new minimum wage law, and then there's California, which in a height of nonsense has enacted a law for fast food restaurants where they're going to give a commission the power to regulate and control and set wages for fast food restaurants. So the reason I chose Minnesota in my blog post Monday is that you have a fascinating situation developing there. You have a really tight labor market there, a scarcity of labor, but tremendous prosperity. And so employers are vying for workers. And in the process, the wage rate, the average wage rate, is skyrocketing. Welders are getting paid like $20, $25. Roofers are getting paid the same amount. And the state's minimum wage law ranges from $8 and something for small businesses and $10 and something for larger businesses. And so, the point I was making is that in Minnesota, the socialists, the statists must be really embarrassed, because for years they've been telling us that the reason you need a minimum wage is because these greedy, profit-seeking bourgeois swine of capitalist employers will only pay a subsistence wage at most. I mean, they might even pay less because they don't care about their workers. And since if they're not being forced to, they're going to pay the lowest wage possible. Well, here in Minnesota, then how does that explain the fact that employers are paying twice the minimum wage? I mean, have they suddenly become more benevolent and more caring in Minnesota? No, it's ridiculous. It's what we've been saying from the very beginning of FFF, that wages are no different from any other good or service, that they're determined by the laws of supply and demand. When there's a scarcity of labor, fewer workers, and there's a lot of employers and a lot of demand for workers, wages will tend to go up. When it's the other way around, there's a large supply of workers and there's not much demand for workers, wages will go down. But you can't legislate away the laws of supply and demand. So what the minimum wage ultimately does is it locks out of the labor market people whose labor is valued in the marketplace at less than that minimum. And that's why in Minnesota, there's blacks that are not receiving the benefits of all this prosperity. If you didn't have a minimum wage of $8 or $10, they could compete at $7 or $6. And these employers would love that, hey, this guy's willing to work at $6, but the minimum wage locks them out of the labor market, consigns them to welfare. So it's just another example of what we've been saying from the very beginning. This is minimum wage nonsense, and it's really minimum wage tyranny. What do you think, Richard?
Well, I want to pick up on a little bit of the theme that you were bringing about this Minnesota law, Minnesota situation, excuse me, and that is that as you were saying, wages per hour for a wide variety of skilled and even unskilled labor are anywhere from $21 an hour to $24 an hour. Employers have been so desperate that they have transported people to Minnesota from, let's say, Puerto Rico. They've been interested in attracting workers from other countries, including Somalia and Africa, refugees from there. And yet, there are segments of the domestic African American or Black community in Minnesota who are experiencing a much higher level of unemployment, both statewide as well as by the national average, than these other groups. And of course, there's the undertone that, well, there's something must be racially motivated discrimination. But if that was the case, why are these employers incurring the expenses, air expenses, housing costs, accommodation for food preferences, to even transport in people from Puerto Rico or Somali refugees if there's a racist, prejudice against people who are not white? The entire issues must be looked at in that from a different direction. It has to be looked at domestic policies, government interventions that have inhibited the educational and employment opportunities of domestic minority groups that have nothing to do with racism as something motivating employers. But more generally concerning the issue here, the fact is that we all know commonsensically that when we go shopping, we realize that we have a budget constraint, and that is the amount of money in our pocket. And the amount of money is limited because our uses for it are far wider. We buy food, we pay our rent or our mortgage, we have our car payment, we go out having our entertainment expenses, we have our monthly food bill, and so on and so forth. And given that we're aware of these constraints, if we see something that looks interesting or desirable to buy, we invariably look at the price tag. And we might purchase it because they say, now that's worth it. That's a deal. But all of us have experienced instances in which we've turned over the price tag, let's say on a coat or a shirt or a jacket or pants or something, and said, well, I like this, but ouch, either I can't afford it or I don't think it's worth it. In other words, it's not worth the price being asked, given paying that price would then preclude me from having a sum of money to spend in other ways that I decide is more valuable to me instead. The opportunity cost of our scarce means of buying things. If that is the case, and we all commonsensically know it as the average day consumer, why would we not expect the same from any existing or prospective employer? The employer has no money to pay wages other than the revenue he earns from selling products to the consuming public. So when he's interested in hiring anyone for any type of job, he has to ask himself, well, what is it that I have to pay him to bring him onto my labor force? What is the wage that I have to pay? And that in relation to what will he contribute in making a product that I can then sell at a prospective price to the consumers that would justify his hire? In other words, will the value he adds to offering a product that can be marketed greater than the wage that has to be incurred to bring him on to the company's labor force? If it's anticipated that the value added of the employer is less than the product value of the product that he can help produce, it's advantageous. It's profitable to hire him. But if the employer estimates that his value added is going to be less than the wage that has to be paid to him, he's not going to hire him. Now, when you impose a minimum wage, it is true that any employer who thinks that part or some of his labor force are still worth more than what the government is requiring them to pay, they'll keep their jobs. But to use the lingo of the economist, at the margin, any employees who he estimates are not worth the $15 an hour, let us say, compared to the $8 that previously he had to pay, will say it's not worth keeping them. So he'll let them go. Or someone will retire and he won't be replaced. Or if he'd been thinking of expanding his business, he won't add additional workers. You can't make a person or anything that you're interested in buying worth more than what the buyer thinks it's worth. So however well-intentioned such things as minimum wage laws may seem, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. There are unintended consequences. And the consequences is that by imposing these minimum wages, that therefore price some members of the labor force out of employment by making their market price greater than what they're worth from the employer's point of view, you harm some of the very people you want to assist. They're now permanently unemployed. As long as what they have to be paid is greater than what they're worth, they're not going to have a job. So you then create a sort of underworld of permanent unemployment of a good part of the segment of the parts of the population that the well-intended people say they want to assist. You're making a bad situation even worse. And by locking them out in this way, you prevent any opportunity for improvement. If I can just make a few more points about this, Jacob. Let's suppose someone has dropped out of high school and therefore has minimal education and very little workplace experience. And the employer says, I think this guy is worth maybe $5 an hour, but not much more than this. But even if he has to take a job at $5 an hour, the fact is that's getting his foot on the rung, the bottom rung of that ladder of opportunity, workplace experience, skills in performing certain product productions or consumer interaction settings, like a fast food restaurant, for instance. How to be punctual, how to fulfill the job requirements, learning new things that over time may make you more valuable and therefore deserving of a raise either with your existing employer, or if he's not willing to give you that raise, but you think you have now greater skills that makes you more valuable, to look around to try to find an employer who will see the benefit of doing so. But by locking this out, you keep people not only off that bottom rung of the ladder, but any opportunity for as long as that situation exists of even getting on the ladder at all ever. You're creating this permanent underworld of second-class citizens due to the perversity of such interferences with the price system as minimum wage laws.
Yeah, that's a lot of good points there. And to prove your point on this underclass permanently unemployed, I mean, that's been the case with Black teenagers. I mean, yes. that unemployment rate year after year, it's been permanent for about like 20 to 30%. And the state has just scratched their heads. Oh, why is this so? Why is this so? Well, the evidence is right there. It's because minimum wage laws lock them out of the labor market. They don't have the degree of education to justify paying them in the subjective mind of an employer the minimum wage. But they'd be willing to work at $5 an hour, $4 an hour to get their foot in the door, learn a trade, learn a business so they can go out and start their own business. But the minimum wage law keeps them from doing that. I mean, essentially, the minimum wage is a way to protect the well-to-do, the educated well-to-do from competition, because it enables them not to worry about the Black teenager coming in and undercutting them on price and competing on price. Now, the statists will say, oh, well, but it's just terrible that the Black teenagers would be exploited at $4 an hour. Well, the Black teenager doesn't feel like he's being exploited at all. Remember, value is subjective. He thinks it's valuable that he's being able to get his foot in the door, even though he's not making very much money for a year or two. A good example of this is among the well-to-do, the elite well-to-do, are the internships that the elite well-to-do send their children to do during college, like when they go work for a congressman. They work for free, Richard. They don't get paid anything. Now, why do they do that? Because they want work experience. They want to put it on their resume and so forth. How is that any different from a black teenager saying, "I'll work for $1 an hour, or $4 an hour, or $5 an hour"? And another fascinating aspect of this Minnesota situation is how happy the workers are. Naturally, I read in an article on the situation that one woman, she was from Texas, I think. She was making $10 an hour or so as a roofer. She'd gone to some special school for roofing. And man, she saw what was going on in Minnesota, just pilled up stakes and moved right over there. And she says she's as happy as she could be. And now notice that there's no government planning here. No government planner is saying, well, we need a certain number of workers over here. The roofing business really needs workers. Let's let these people in Texas know that this opportunity exists. No. This is all the price system that's working. This is how our free market operates. This woman learns and hears about the higher wages. She doesn't understand. She doesn't need to understand why there's a higher wage for roofers over there. All she knows is that there's a higher wage. She pulls up stakes and moves. No central planning, no controls at the Minnesota border to check people's papers, to make sure that they're not terrorists and drug dealers and so forth. It's just free movements of people into the state. And everybody seems happy. Now, I'm sure the employers are not extremely happy that they're having to pay these enormous wages, but that's just the market conditions. The fact is, they're making a lot of money too right now with this unbelievable degree of prosperity. Everybody's doing well, except for those people that are locked out of the labor market by the minimum wage. Let me turn our attention over to California. Their situation is a little bit different, but it's kind of typical of California. They didn't enact a law to raise the minimum wage. They're delegating this to a commission where the commission has the authority to study the situation and then set whatever wage it deems necessary. So, Richard, you've got two wrongs taking place here. One is that it's the legislature that really should be enacting the laws, and what they're really doing is they're delegating to a commission legislative authority. And so they become the little dictocrats that are going to be setting the wages in these fast food restaurants. And the fast food restaurants, the governor there, Newsom, said, oh, fast food restaurants are notorious for taking advantage of their workers and abusing their workers. Are you kidding me? This is like the greatest foot in the door for people, fast food restaurants. You see young people working at McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever. It's their foot in the door. This is a great opportunity that these places have for people to learn, as you say, a work ethic, getting to work on time, how to treat a customer. The customer's always right. These are things that you don't learn in public schools or government schools. So you've got now a commission that's going to turn into this little dictocrat agency there in California, along with all the others they have.
I should mention about this, the piece that I was reading about it was pointing out in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, that how do you define a fast food restaurant? It's where customers come in and mostly they pay at the cashier's counter, and they pay before they receive the food, right? You sit down restaurant, you eat, and then you pay, right? So they're defining a fast food restaurant where you pay at the cash register ahead of receiving the meal. So that's one of the defining characteristics, like that will come under this commission's oversight. So the Wall Street Journal reporters were speaking to several fast food franchise owners, et cetera, et cetera. So they said, this is going to be so expensive that we're going to change our model. We're going to add seats so people sit down and eat before, like a more traditional restaurant. Or they'll change other features through automation that will reduce the need to hire as many workers. So what they're basically going to do is they're going to result in some fast food restaurants, franchises going out of business because they won't be able to adapt to the higher minimum wage that this commission imposes. So that's going to cost jobs. It's going to diminish food purchase options for people who enjoy or find it convenient or even necessary, given other constraints on their time, to purchase and eat through a fast food restaurant. And at the same time, the availability of them will be diminished because the models will change in a way so that they won't come under that aegis, and some other people will lose their jobs. So the thing is a denial of the laws of the market, supply and demand, how prices and wages are established competitively, and is a total denial of the unintended consequences of government interventions. It brings about responses on the part of other people to minimize the damage that the intervention is causing. And part of that response is going to be contrary to the purposes of the intervener. He's going to make employment opportunities fewer and less and different for the employees that they say they nominally wish to assist.
So, Richard, why do you think that there's so much widespread support for this nonsense? I mean, America was founded on the principles of a free market. There was no minimum wage. I mean, we know there were some bad founding principles like slavery and so forth, but for most of the population, you had a free market. There was no minimum wage for more than 100 years. I mean, that's our heritage. And time and again, the genuine economists, the real economists, have shown what you and I are talking about, that you cannot just pass a law to make people wealthy. If you could, North Korea would be bountiful. Cuba would have be drowning in goods and services and so forth, because these socialist countries, that's what they've tried to do. They've tried to legislate wealth into existence, legislate prosperity into existence. Throughout ages, I mean, that's really what governments have done: regulated economic activity. The real exception was the United States, that goes off and founds a system where we're not going to have economic regulation. We're not going to have occupational licensure laws that govern who can work in what occupations or professions. We're not going to have a minimum wage law. Not going to have maximum hour legislation. But everything starts to change in the early 1900s. I mean, the socialist wave was encompassing not just Europe and Asia and the rest of the world. It was coming to the United States as well. And so you see this trend starting to take place in the early 1900s, and they culminate in Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal during the Great Depression, where the Great Transformation took place. And the Supreme Court said, effectively, we will never declare any of this unconstitutional, after they'd already declared the minimum wage unconstitutional as a violation of the principles of economic liberty and liberty of contract. What do you think about this? The fact that so many people continue to believe in this nonsense when it's so clear that it is nonsense, and after so many decades of having received information like from FFF and other libertarian foundations of what nonsense this is?
Well, I think that there's at least two elements in this. Of course, others could see others, but the two that stand out to me is ignorance and what Bastiat called what is seen and what is unseen. What do I mean by ignorance? Let me give an example. You'll recall, Jacob, that recently Mikhail Gorbachev passed away, the last head of the Soviet Communist Party, oversaw the end of the Soviet Union over 30 years ago now, in 1991. So I decided to bring this up in my classes last week. Just take a little bit of time to draw my students' attention to this. So I asked them who knew who Mikhail Gorbachev was. Right, this is a class of like about 30 odd students. Two raised their hands. Well, does anybody know what country he was the head of? Dead silence. But then one student said, wasn't that the Soviet something? I said, yes, the Soviet Union. Does anybody know what the political or economic system was in the Soviet Union? A few hands went up. Didn't they have communism? Okay. Can anybody tell me what communism is? Dead silence. The educational system in the United States, and I'm not blaming these students. they're a product of their environment, by which I mean state monopoly education through which most of these students have had to pass. They learn nothing, or they learn ideological propaganda or leftist gobbledygook about, oh, socialism, it makes a better world. We're all going to be love and peace and we share. Oh, and that they know nothing. So why is there no appreciation of the heritage that you're talking about? America was founded in liberty. We practice economic freedom. They don't know anything about this. Now, of course, that's an exaggeration. There are some students who are interested and have learned some things about it. But I'm talking about the student body in general. They don't. Or the history they've learned is upside down from the way that a friend of freedom understands the reality of the early century, let's say, of the United States, at least in terms of a wide swath of economic freedom. The other aspect of this is what the French liberal economist of the early 19th century, Frederick Bastiat, called what is seen and what is unseen. So they listened to politicians and they said, well, look at this wage that a person is earning. Is that a living wage? Is that a fair wage? Look how wealthy the businessman is who employs these people. There ought to be a law for fairness and justice. And so, sure, make the employer pay the guy $15 an hour instead of $7.25. That'll improve the situation so what he can afford it. That's what's seen, as Bastiat would say. What is unseen? The laws of the marketplace underlying why a wage is paid in an open market the way it is. What is the demand for that labor? What is the available supply in relation to it? What are the labor skills and therefore the value added that the employer can add to the firm, as I was trying to explain a few minutes earlier? Who does the employer have to satisfy? Just some employee or the consumer, ultimately, who either buys the product or not at a particular price, out of which comes a certain revenue, out of which the salaries can be paid. They don't think about this, most people. If in their own daily lives, when it affects them, they see elements of it, but they can't generalize, they can't conceptualize. And that ignorance of understanding the chains of logic in understanding the core elements of how markets work, including wages and labor hire, is a constant element of this. And you see, there's no memory gene in people. Just because people in, let's say, 1890 may have understood some of these things, does not mean that it was by genetic inheritance passed on to a current generation of Americans. These ideas have to be relearned, reappreciated, re-understood by each generation. As it has sometimes been said, the loss of freedom is only just one generation away. And I'll just make one other point about this. There's a famous sociologist, now long passed away, who taught for many years at the University of Chicago, named Edward Shils, Shils. And he wrote a book back in the 1980s called Tradition. And he said, how does tradition, which means ideas, customs, understandings, values, get transmitted intergenerationally, so that you can say, the values of a society or a culture over time? He says it has to have three overlapping generations: the grandparents, the parents, and the grandkids, because every new generation learns from its parents and the grandparents, who had even a longer personal experience that they share with the grandkids. And if that's broken or undermined or ridiculed or attempted to be short-circuited through various government policies, the new generation loses the memory and the understanding that earlier generations had, and then it's lost to them. It's like asking students today, who were the founding fathers? What motivated them? Why did they support the ideas in the Declaration of Independence, or the thinking behind the institutional makeup of the Constitution? They know nothing about this because they haven't been taught it. Or if they have been taught it in our, quote, left-wing progressive woke education today, they learn a pseudo Marxian understanding of these things, of class conflict and exploitation, all now covered up with the idea of race and gender. And this is the difficulty, that they do not understand. And each passing generation in which that older understanding and knowledge is further away means that the current generation is even more ignorant.
No, those are good points. I mean, maybe there's some hope for these people yet, though, because notice that they don't call for the minimum wage to be $100 an hour or $1,000 an hour. And if you were to ask them, why not make it $1,000 an hour so that everybody would be wealthy, they would see the fallacy of that argument. They would say, oh, Jacob, that would be ridiculous. That would put businesses out of business. Well, if they can see that, there's at least hope that maybe they will see that the same principle applies wherever you set this minimum wage. It's going to have adverse consequences. There are no shortcuts to wealth and prosperity. It can only come about through free market principles, accumulation of capital. If legislation could do it, every socialist country from North Korea to Venezuela and Cuba would be very bountiful countries.
Yeah,
So,
I can just sort of, if I can just add to that, is that makes it very important. We have, fortunately, and we value those viewers and listeners who either regularly or occasionally listen into this kind of a show that we do, or read things on the FFF site and other free market sites that try to, spread the good ideas as well. It emphasizes how important everyone who understands or values liberty, how important they are in being one of the little elements in the society to help maintain, preserve, and help spread those ideas so that they're not lost, and that a regeneration of a spirit of liberty can be restored. And every viewer and listener who watches our kind of show, or any of the others that espouse our common similar ideas, I want to thank them for taking the time out of their crowded life to take seriously the cause of liberty, and maybe through shows like this and others to get a little bit of the intellectual ammunition, as Ayn Rand used to call it, to be able to go forth and talk to friends, relatives, co-workers in the right, over lunch settings where politics sometimes comes up in a discussion, to sort of counter these fallacies and very dangerous ideas which are not opposed and basically replaced, will lead to a very dark future for the country.
All right. On that excellent note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Appreciate those of you that have sent us donations here at mid-year. It really helps out. If you haven't yet done that, we'd greatly appreciate your help. And if you're new to FFF, subscribe to our FFF Daily. We've strived to make that the finest email daily publication on the internet for, over 20 years now. And we have a monthly journal, Future of Freedom. We have some great books, our YouTube channel, and of course, Libertarian Angle. So, Richard, I greatly enjoyed the visit as always, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.